Welcome to Coffee and Contemplation. I'm Robin.
And I'm Steve.
And we're discussing Chapter 5, The Nina Project. So first things first, listeners, I want to promise you that these are our real names.
It's true. Can confirm.
But before we get into the episode breakdown, so this is your first time on Coffee and Contemplation. You were over on my other podcast, Classified, with our friend Aaron.
It's true.
When we classified characters from Into the Spider-Verse. But since this is your first time on this pod, go ahead and just tell us a little bit about yourself, your overall history with Stranger Things, and generally how you feel about season 4.
Sure. I love Stranger Things and have loved it since it first came out. Right when the first season came out, not long after that, I think that first New Year's, I even threw a party where we played lots of scenarios from Betrayal at House on the Hill while we just had Stranger Things season 1 on in the background. So I had a deep love for this, especially because that first season really hit strong for me and I really loved it and got very attached to it. There was just so much agency from so many characters, and I don't know why, but I couldn't believe hearing other people talk about this 80s inspired horror. I just don't know why I didn't think it would work. It sounded silly to me, and then by the time I was looking at the set dressings in the first episode, I was just totally along for the ride. And then, I've been on your other podcast. I do love to play Dungeons and Dragons. Also love to act, and D&D is certainly a good outlet for that. And it being a big part of Stranger Things is also something to love and want to participate in. I mean, I even bought the Stranger Things 5th edition set
Did you really?
For a friend, and we played that module where you play as kids.
I'm so jealous.
It's so fun, and you play as kids in Hawkins, and it has like a loose class structure that's like, you still play as a fighter, but you're playing as these kids in Hawkins, and you're still investigating the mystery and other paranormal activity or extraterrestrial and other scenarios that can be generated by the DM's discretion. Throughout most of my watch of season 4, and the hype behind it, I think a lot of us were wondering if any characters would die. Us having played this one shot, some friends and I, my character died, and we definitely talked about like, wow, well, that was actually kind of heavy, even for our D&D game. Steve, you were playing a kid. How crazy and how heavy and hard would that be to really go through with like the idea of a child's death in this show, especially after season 1 was so strong and emotionally resonating around Will and his disappearance, and could he possibly have been dead? Mm-hmm. That agency of Will's disappearance and that possibility of his death really brought a lot of the emotion from season 1 to like this strong magnetic north for me. And I feel like that's what's been starting to decrease as the show has been going on. Despite some of my maybe dissonant feelings throughout season 4, by the time it ended, I was like, okay, maybe I thought some other things would be happening here, but I was also like, cool, you finally hit this exposition note that I'm ready for more.
Cool. Well, then with that said, let's proceed with contemplation. For this episode, we're going to discuss California Crew, Russia, Hawkins, and then wrap up with 11, since California Crew opens the episode and then 11 closes it.
Nice.
So starting with the California Crew.
The cold open of this episode was, like tough and traumatic events to me. They're in crisis as they're driving away with that agent. I don't know. I felt like while that was really good and took a certain tone at the beginning of the episode, I also felt like things got overshadowed so quickly with Argyle's penchant for comedy relief. Maybe just in general, I would say when he comes into the mix, I oftentimes wonder as a new character, why is Jonathan not being afforded more here?
That's a really interesting way to look at it, because I will admit on this podcast, most of us really love Argyle. But I do think you make an excellent point, which is if Argyle wasn't there, Jonathan might have had more to do. That's really interesting.
I miss Jonathan having more agency in general.
Yes, absolutely.
And I feel like his looking after Will and Mike is great. And we've seen that before. I also just wanted to see Jonathan after these previous episodes that I feel like in some of the love with Argyle, which I do love Argyle. I don't want to be too critical of Argyle because I have a sensitive soul to that spirit, and especially that dude bra energy. And I feel like there's even a former me that was that person, especially in high school. So I feel like there's definitely an empathy for that love there. But yeah, I really wanted Jonathan to step up to the plate more. Yeah, Argyle was just a lot of comedy relief and sort of jeopardizing, I think, Jonathan's ability to step up and maybe shake literally the cloud of smoke and where he's found himself. But it seemed more like a joke. And while they were burying even the agent man, I felt like that could have just strangely been a heavier scene. And it didn't play very heavy to me that someone died in front of them.
Well, 2 people died as far as they know. The one agent gets shot when they come in.
Yeah.
And then you have who you see is still alive, but they don't know that.
That's
and
right.
then this
the
guy dies in front of them. Yeah. I mean, because I was wondering about that too, but I'm like, well, Mike has technically watched 11 kill people.
Yeah.
So there is
true.
that. But I will say though that one thing that I want to just touch on and kind of reflect back on is the fact that in the previous episodes, the fact that we see Mike and Will making up, I think this is a really good example of why that needed to happen when it did. Because I was kind of wondering, well, what if that hadn't happened? What if they had gone off on this journey and they were still at odds? And I like that they made up because I think this dynamic is a lot more valuable. That they're on this trip together. They didn't need because how weird would it have been if they're like still sitting there like kind of not happy with one another? Like I like this dynamic a lot better because this feels more like them from, I know, Broken Records season 2.
Well, there's a high point to me in the California crew in this particular episode, and it's that I liked that during the burial of the agent man, whose name I can't seem to recollect.
Well, that's what they call him repeatedly.
Oh, yeah, I was
hero agent man, dude.
Hero agent man, red shirt.
Yeah, exactly. I feel so. Oh man.
Yeah, I mean
both of these agents. Oh man.
They did a great job playing the intensity, those agents, in the contrast of the kids' atmosphere, which was awesome because I feel like it was for them to be confused by like, oh my God, the severity of all of this. But I liked that Will and Mike were doing the burying together. I liked that they were both participating in it. Mm-hmm. And I do feel like there's a moment here that I was like, Will is still figuring himself out and experiencing a lot of things. And we're seeing him struggle with that. Like we're seeing his mental struggle. And there is kind of a brief moment here that although, maybe I wanted this burial to be a bit more serious and maybe feel the weight of the crisis kind of coming to this breath, this like maybe moment of release or relief. But I did like that Will turns and looks at Mike while Mike is kind of in this white shirt, looking a little dirty from the burying. And like for this brief little moment, I can actually see this, like, I can see how this boy is sad, conflicted right now. And he's looking at his friend that I know he's having complex feelings for too. And I could see this strange moment of attraction. I was like, that was a cool moment in this very complicated scene with complicated stakes.
Yeah. He knows that Mike is thinking about 11, but Will is concerned about 11. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I liked that moment also. And I do genuinely like the moment they have on the trunk of the car.
Same.
But it's one of those moments in the season where I'm like, I just think a little bit more of a nudge in a specific direction would have been better. I wish that Mike had looked a little bit more like, wait, what are you trying to tell? And then there's like the distraction of, hey, what's the dead dude's name? Like, because again, everyone talks about the scene in the van later with the painting and how like, it's like, Mike, come on.
Yeah. How do you not see this, Mike?
But I think it happens here as well. It's like, I just, as focused as Mike is, I prefer him being more emotionally intuitive. Yeah. And so again, I like the scene a lot. It works, but I'm like, I think it could have been like just that much stronger if like Mike had been starting to pick up on it.
Yeah. He could approach that with any level of observing it, being anxious to it, wondering himself. Yeah. I just think there's a there's so many complicated and complex feelings there. And I have to imagine as actors, that's got to be really great to play with and try to work with and evoke. And, you know, how tough has that got to be kids exploring complicated feelings that they're feeling for the first time?
One thing, though, that I do think is funny, it's curious, is that they end up in a junkyard of sorts,
yeah,
which is just like of all the places, because it does look a lot like the one in Hawkins, just a different like geographical backdrop. So I'm guessing the Duffers must like that as like a backdrop.
They must love that kind of vibe.
Yeah, I mean, it works.
Yeah, it works, and I imagine, you know, it's an interesting. You know, it's got to be an interesting area to shoot too, because I'm sure all of the wreckage and metallic surfaces are cool against the sky and natural environment, and it probably brings out the characters really well.
And yeah, I mean, Mike's idea to go to Susie, like they find the thing. It's a good idea. I remember when I watched through this the first time, I was like, oh, okay, cool. I was on board.
Yes.
But one thing that actually a mutual friend of ours, Brian, I feel like I've mentioned him at some point on the podcast before, but he's a cinematographer, director. Something that he said about chapter 6, when it comes to the stuff in chapter 6 with Susie's house, it shifts from the synth score to this John Williams-esque symphonic score.
Totally different.
And he went, what on earth? And I was like, it happens in this episode first.
Oh, yeah.
It happens when when Mike gets the map, and I was like, there it is.
Yeah.
And it feels weird.
It is. It's a weird feeling and vibe. And like, I think for some consistency's sake, I guess there's a part of me that wants to be like, cool, I guess that's a nice editor's touch between the episodes, but is it really? Because we know what we'll review later, but I'm also with you. I recollected what goes on in the episode with Susie. The idea of it was very exciting.
Yeah.
How convenient, I guess, that based on their location out west, the California crew could feasibly drive the pizza van to, what was it, Salt Lake City?
Yep.
At that point, I was like, you know, I can afford the callback to a character that was pretty important and dropped in at the end of season 3.
I remember thinking, well, I'm interested in that because I'll be interested to see what she's like with interacting with our characters in person. So at this stage on the first watch, I was actually kind of looking forward to it. I was like, this could be cool.
Yeah, it was a good hook, especially towards the end of the episode, because I thought, oh man, cool. Like, I will say this was the episode that, seeing it again, it kind of reinforced this spot for me that was like the California crew just needed more of an objective.
Yes.
And this was the episode that it developed. And I know the previous episodes had their own import and for reasons which, you know, are still good. But this was really where I was like, oh, the stakes are high. The crew has found their objective. And so going to Susie's, I was like, oh, sweet. They're going to go somewhere totally different. What could happen?
I think partly what was also happening, the first time through, that doesn't quite last very long anymore, was this idea of, especially because we're also seeing what's happening to 11, it's pretty awful. So I think the idea of like, they are coming, like they are coming to get her. Like, who knows what that will look like when they get there. But I mean, we know, we've seen it, but at the time it was like, okay, at least there's someone coming to help her.
Yeah, because this is a pretty heavy episode as you think about what's going on with 11 and how traumatic that is. And I would say that knowledge as like, oh, thank you. I now know that someone is on their way to go help her, to save her, something that was at least giving me, it was inciting some hope.
Yeah. Well, then I think we're going to leave the California crew right there, and we're going to switch to Operation Russia.
All right, here we go.
So starting with Hopper and Antonov, the fact that we come back to Hopper after the credits, it just continues this parallel between Hop and L, and I do really like that. As awful as it is, how this ultimately winds up being reminiscent of his past too. Like it continues this parallel, and it's, again, it's weird because it's horrible.
It's like they were in their own state of prison and being stuck in these situations that I think they themselves were sort of like stuck in the weight of their own actions, because I think 11 was sort of swindled to come out here and then was immediately trapped. And I think Hop was trapped by his own actions to come to this place.
But he and Antonov are both swindled by Yuri.
That's true.
So it's
the ultimate swindler.
Yeah. in this situation that he now has even less control over that he did before. But I do like the little like fight that he has with Antonov. It makes sense. He'd be angry, but then he doesn't hold. He knows that Antonov is right. He's like, yeah, you're right. We both lost. And so it's not his fault.
No.
You know, and that's one of the things. And the only reason I'm like mentioning that specific small thing is because that's what I love about Hopper is moments like that when he's like, yeah, there's no point in like beating you into a pulp because it doesn't do anything. And you're right. And he's smart enough even in that circumstance to know that he's right.
I love Hop fighting Antonov, but I did not love, while I loved his monologue in the cell talking about his daughter going to war, what happened to him coming back. That was new information for us.
Yes, it was.
As the audience, and it was powerful.
It's the entire reason it's there is for us.
Yeah, and so I'm glad for that, but I think the person inside me wanted that to happen with Joyce. Having this moment with this individual who is one of, I think, the few people who understands him as well, is totally this great, desperate, pure love and trust and honor. And maybe that's the biggest stuff that I'm going to give it its most credit. The honor between these two characters in this very desperate situation, I really loved.
Yeah, and it's funny because this is the reason I think Antonov is there. They wanted this to come out, I think, when Hop is at his absolute lowest moment. And I don't think they would have given that moment to him with Joyce. This is an actual character-driven moment, and I do really love it. Even though it is spoon-feeding us exposition.
Yeah.
I mean, it's for Hopper also, but it's this, we're just going to like throw all of this exposition on top of you. And yet somehow it works. And I mean, from my perspective, I would say a lot of it is Harbor.
Yeah. Oh, and that's for sure, because it's so emotionally impactful. And as he's telling the story, I'm glad that we got some beats and shifts and cuts to see some of that past as well. It made it more impactful. And so I loved that. And that monologue, yes, is incredibly powerful. Do I maybe wish it could have happened with somebody else? Maybe, sure. But I can still empathize with being at the end of your road, feeling that, and having nobody else to say this thing to that maybe you've just never said. And I have to believe in my heart of hearts, with all of the jokes and the age of this show and the time period, Hopper is a man who does not prioritize his mental health. And so I can see this being something coming out in this moment. Like, it's not something that doesn't not make sense to me.
Yeah.
As he started telling this story, I immediately hearkened to some of his feelings that he's described throughout the show as well, like feeling like a black hole. And this monologue, and this monologue was a callback to that for me. I mean, he didn't directly say that, but I immediately was like, oh my God, this poor man, I can feel his inescapable prison that he's in. He's in his own mental prison, and here he is in prison. So maybe some of this really did work. But yeah, I loved the monologue. As an actor, that's the type of monologue that I would be like thirsting to put my teeth around and figure out how to do and work with too. So big hats off to Harbor on that one, because I love his performance as Hopper in this show, and it's giving me so much more to want for him in the future when he takes any other big opportunities.
I think also something, maybe one of the reasons why I think it works for me that he says this to Antonov is almost because he doesn't have a relationship with Antonov, because it also feels a little bit like the kind of thing you'd hear someone say in therapy. Like, so I think almost having an objective person to say it to is almost why he's able to go there.
That comfort of a stranger and being able to just kind of confess in a way.
Yeah. And what's also kind of interesting, I mean, having the context of the rest of the season, it's also really interesting knowing that Antonov is also a father. Yeah. So Hopper doesn't know that yet. I mean, unless it's come up, but I don't think it has. I mean, what I mean by that is like off screen. The other reason I think they probably put it here, put this conversation here, is because it's yet another parallel to Elle, but it's character driven, because he's him saying, I'm the curse. That's I'm the monster. It's the same internal struggle. It's just, so That's one of the, and it was hearing that this time and kind of absorbing that really for the first time of like just how closely what their inner struggle is.
Yeah.
It was like, oh, that's the reason for all these parallels. And I do think, kind of to your point about us seeing all of those flashbacks, it's like, I think that may very well be something that the Duffers have been working with, keeping in mind with his characterization. Season 3 maybe accepting all the way back to season 1.
Yeah.
And I will go ahead and say I'll call this an expectation. I'm hoping that this is something that they can heal together in season 5.
Yeah. And I'm hoping the same. And also that's a really great 80s theme, the angst between, you know, the youth and their parents. So I feel like that's a strong theme to play on. And I would love to see them mutually heal from their own, you know, prisons that they're in right now. They're both emotionally trapped in things that they haven't moved past. And I hope they figure out how to move on together. You know, in my heart of hearts, as we're giving our Care Bear stare, like, I think love is the answer. And I think that's going to be like ultimately the thing in this show that's going to will out or win out in the end.
Yeah, I certainly hope so. I mean, because this is also a really great example of like, this is the shit Vecna preys on.
Yeah.
This is it. Yeah. And granted, he's not a part of this at all, but I'm like, that's why him as a metaphor for this kind of thinking works as well as it does, because this is what it looks like. We don't get that much time between, I mean, obviously because I thought Hopper was dead, blah, blah, blah. But the fact that we don't get Brown and Harbor together in this season, hardly at all.
Yeah.
Again, I understand why, but it's like they were such a great team in season 2. They worked so well off of each other. I can't wait to see them share screen time again in season 5.
Me too. That will definitely be one of the high notes.
I think in season 2, I said both of those characters are such powerhouses, but in such different ways that it's like, yeah, I want to see more from the two of them.
I think maybe the not as equally graceful and good energy that I'm going to give these next moments are the plane and the capture of Murray and Joyce and Yuri flying them away. It felt bad and hokey, and I just had a really hard time with it. Maybe this episode, in contrast to some of the latter ones with Joyce and Murray, because I actually do like their being in Russia towards the end of it.
Yeah, same.
But the journey there was really difficult for me to have buy-in. And maybe it was just because there were just so many eccentric, unique character personalities that were introduced this season. I felt like Yuri and the clash with Murray and Joyce as well. I just was like, man, what is going on here?
You almost, I mean, you kind of took the words right out of my mouth. Like I know Jenna hates this sequence a lot. The only kind of two things that I think are important in these, well, there's one important thing and then there's one thing I just kind of like. The important thing is that we do get, I think, another, like, again, if you kind of squint and turn your head a little bit, you can get the moment that, you know, they make a joke out of it, but Yuri saying, yeah, I'm trying to support my family. I mean, I think that's becoming a bit of a crutch in this show.
Sure.
But at the same time, I'm like, okay, so we're humanizing him a little bit. Because I think that, and the only reason I say that's important is because I think to buy his turn later in the back half of the season, you need these, because something, I think
little bits.
I think I cut it from the last episode, but something that I remember noticing was when Joyce is passing out, he's like, stroking her head, like her hat. Yeah. I was like, he didn't have to do that. And it doesn't feel icky when he does it, which it could very easily have been.
I'd say his character had the propensity to be creepy.
And he's annoying, but he's never creepy.
Yeah.
And that, I do think that matters.
I could see all of the place of self-interest he was operating from, and I just wasn't sure how he was going to really serve the story. And I was glad to kind of get enough of him to be like, okay, he was the connecting point to Antonov. He went sideways, betraying Antonov here. That works. Captured these people. I believe in his going for the best deal.
Yes.
And so that I'm like, all right, I'm good with that. And maybe the strongest positivity I can give some of these scenes is that this is where I was like, Joyce is the smart one. She encouraged Murray in fighting, even though having the doubt that he clearly had been fighting in like a school with teenagers. And Murray, maybe this is also just my review of Murray on the whole, but Murray is like the Swiss Army character. I feel like he can serve any situation at any given time for reasons that also he's not important enough for me to ask why.
So especially because we're still going off of season 3, where they leaned so hard on humor and they leaned so hard on laughing at their characters that I was ready for him to just absolutely fail at this karate thing.
Yeah, I kind of was too.
So I'm bracing. So the reason that I ultimately like the fight, at least conceptually, is that he does know his stuff. Like he does win. I just wish, like, if I was going to script doctor this bit, Murray just takes him out quickly.
Yeah.
Because that also feels more like Murray's characterization. Maybe I'm off about that, but that's kind of where I land with it.
I'm happy to see that it's a success in where it needed to go for the rest of the season and the story.
Yeah.
But it was some of the most, I'm leaning out, I can't really fully buy this or believe what's going on here. I'm suspending so much disbelief, and I'm just like, you know what? It's fine. It's fine. It's fine, right? It's fine.
It's fine. Well, but fill it with the whole, my hands are like arrows. Like, why though? Like,
that's where I feel like they're,
so
like you
silly.
said, season 3 being so humorous.
Yes.
This felt like a similar moment of like, you are giving me your self-aware humor.
Like maybe like if they had started with that and that's which they do, and then Yuri fights back and blah, blah, blah. And then have Murray abandon that. And it's like, just fight. And like, have it be a little bit more serious. I would have bought in a lot more if they'd done that, because again, to your point, this episode opened with a man dying.
Yeah, it's just a lot.
And we see the one guy, the other agent, in the process of also dying.
Yeah.
Like,
and
what?
And then I think we see the one being captured.
Yes.
Who we know is, in subsequent episodes here, going to be tortured in a very awful way, which, well, the military is its whole other thing as a presence and character force in the show. But I did not love that.
And I want to be clear, because I think that this hasn't really been said yet on this podcast, but I understand that there's a need for levity, but I also think that there's a difference between doing something as ridiculous as this and something like what we see in Hawkins later with the moment between Max and Lucas when she says you're such a dork. I thought you were all cool now. And he's like, I'm not cool. Like, that's a moment of levity, but it's so succinct and it's so grounded in the present moment. It's like, you don't have to take this wild swing away from the stakes of where you're at. And I think that's ultimately where, when we talk about the tonal, it's so tonally dissonant. That's what we're talking about.
Yeah. Couldn't have said it better.
But at the same time, I can look at this moment and be like, Gilman and Ryder definitely do a great job. And I imagine he had probably a blast doing it. So
yeah, I think despite maybe the overall like tones being all over the place, maybe through this season, they're great together.
They are.
I would love to see more with that. And I guess maybe where I'm like still stuck in that review of Murray being this like Swiss Army character who can fit any situation.
It's a great way to put it.
I don't love those types of characters all the time. Oh man, all of a sudden now he knows these things. It's a funny cascade of Murray is able to just do the thing that we need when we need him to.
I mean, they set it up in the first episode with him like talking about getting back from karate practice and all of that, but it's more so I don't mind that part of it. It's more just the fact that they had to work in the mantras and like just do the thing, man. Just do the thing. And then I feel like I would have respected it more, because it would have been like, we really let Murray have his moment.
Yeah, we really let him go for it.
Yeah. And that would have felt more like the Murray that we met in season 2.
Yeah.
But they've turned him into a much more comedic character.
Incredibly so.
And granted, I mean, again, praise to Brett Gelman, because I feel like he makes that work in a way not unlike Eduardo Franco as Argyle. It's like, on paper, I don't think I would like that character, but them in the role and probably credit to the direction as well. But like their natural charisma is what manages to make it work, and their handling of a lot of that.
That's true, because really Murray is an incredibly likable character.
He is.
And I'm going to go with saying that's probably Gelman. I think Gelman's pulling a lot of the weight on that one. The ridiculousness of the fight in the air was something that I had a hard time buying, and that buy-in forced me leaning out. And we talked about, I do fight choreography for stage, and I love that in film, what's so cool is you can put the eye of the beholder wherever you need it to be to sell the fight. And I feel like in a plane, which can feel pretty claustrophobic, There's only so many places you can go. So everything was really on the profile. And because of the chanted mantras and the editing that was going back and forth between outside the plane, inside the plane, back to Joyce, close-ups that were on either Yuri or Murray, it just was all edited in a really weird way that maybe it was great for Murray and funny, but it wasn't to me like a good fight. And I know that, in the grand scheme of things, they're in one part of a set and we're being sold on some green screen stuff outside and animation that, this plane is under these disastrous conditions while this fight is also just happening on the plane. That stuff's hard. And especially in a place that I'm like, Russia's windy. It's very cold. It's snowy. Flying conditions have to be pretty stressful. So there's just a lot for me to try to really consider with this fight going on. And so, yeah, I think the over-the-topness of it is what they were going for, and that was probably the safe call and editing bet. But as far as fights go, I do thirst for more continuous action going on in a shot versus things being cut so quickly and then assembled later for it to work. That was an example of it worked because it was edited that way. Not because I thought it was a good fight or that anything looked continuous.
Yeah, it's not great.
Yeah, not a high point for the episode or, the season.
No. But then, I think on that note, we're going to shift to Hawkins.
All right, yeah. Oh, great, yeah.
Yeah. I have a section kind of towards the end that's sort of for Eddie and the Tigers, but Eddie kind of flirts between both groups.
That's true.
So I will say that, after watching chapter 4 and spending so much time on chapter 4, I was so happy to see Eddie. I don't know, it was such a delightful little surprise to be so surprised that I was happy to see this character. Because
we needed his energy back into the group dynamic, I think.
Because I said in chapter 4, and I stand by this, that his presence in chapter 4 would have been out of place.
Yeah. At
the same time, very happy he's back.
Yes, yeah. The agency of his being on the lam was becoming an important focal point.
Yeah, and just kind of moving into the rest of the stuff, I love when they come upstairs, when Nancy and Dustin come upstairs and they see the drawings, and I do love the shout out to Will, which I thought was kind of cute considering that there's been so much emphasis on we don't have Elle. It was God, we need Will. It was just such a great little line. I love that.
Yeah, well, and I think Will has been so essential to all of this story.
In this moment, the moving the drawings around, it was also very reminiscent of the second season.
Yeah, very.
I was like, I like that. I didn't need the, Dustin's always eating joke. We didn't need that.
No, yeah, we definitely didn't need that.
But then the Creel house, man.
Yeah.
This scene is this whole sequence, it's just so great.
It felt the most on brand.
Right when they first get there, Steve and Nancy taking the boards down. It's a really interesting contrast to Jonathan and Nancy boarding up the window at the end of the season.
Oh.
Literally down to the framing and the blocking. Nancy is framed right, Steve is framed left. Jonathan is framed left, Nancy is framed right. And it's interesting that they are taking this board down and at the end they're putting it back up. And I was
that is interesting.
But that stands in really interesting contrast to some other elements about them in this sequence.
Yeah.
Well, in these sequences.
I feel like it sets up so much of that framing between Nancy's feelings for both of these characters.
Yeah. I love I found a key. I love her. I love Robin. She's so great.
Yeah. I love Robin because I feel like where the rest of the crew can get so up in the clouds and in the sky about what's going on and their wonderings. I have to think in my mind, it is pretty ludicrous that some of these things just come up and it's yeah, we'll call it a Demogorgon. Oh, it's Vecna. Mm-hmm. It's this, it's that, it's all of that. And Robin is so matter-of-factly logical sometimes that I'm Robin is probably in my mind the Spock of this group in some ways. She's just the logical one to me, and I find her humor so funny.
Same.
Where I see Steve as the high charisma, high wisdom, but low intelligence, for sure. I think it goes oppositely in the other direction for Robin. I think that Robin has the high intelligence, but the low wisdom. that's where the two of them complement each other. They're good scene partners. They're good foils.
They're a good team.
Yeah, they're a really good team. Like their energy is very driving.
There was something so barbarian-esque though about let's just throw a brick through things.
Yeah, that's
Barbarian wizard multi-class.
They have such interesting problem solving skills, all of them, as they all just kind of mesh their skills together.
I mean, I could very easily see, like I've often said that my opinion is that Max is a rogue, but I could but like if Robin wasn't there, I feel like Max would have done that.
Yeah. Oh, like, for sure.
You know, once they get inside the Krill house, I love Steve and Dustin. I do. Mm-hmm. But I'm not sure that I dug this. And this is partly, I think, holdover energy on my part from season 3. This like, where did you get the flashlights? Do you need to be told everything? And then like, you cracked the case. Like, why are we doubling down on the fact that because in both cases, like, why doesn't he get a flashlight? And he is picking up on the clock pattern. Again, he's asking good questions and we're making it out like he's being stupid. I'm like, the theory is not great. Like, is he a clockmaker? But like, he's picking up on the pattern. And I'm like, bad ideas lead to good ideas, right? Like and they've all said shit like that before. Yeah. So I'm like, that's one of the only Steve Dustin dynamic moments that I didn't love.
You know, like I love the moments where Steve doesn't know something that he would maybe question of Dustin, but at the same time, he would just as easily be like, it's kind of Han Solo energy. It's asking, hearing the question from 3PO and being like, yeah, okay, yeah, whatever, man, sure. And then immediately turning over to Chewbacca and being like, yeah, actually pair it with the power cuplink and that's going to fix it. That's what I love about it because I see that Han Solo and Steve by not knowing, but also being so like, earnestly and almost damnedly confident. It's just his energy. So like I loved that. I love that energy when they play with it. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. The Sherlock quote.
Yes.
Because I like that Dustin said it and to Steve in that moment it seems stupid and like, yeah, whatever.
Well, he didn't answer Steve's question.
Yeah.
That's the other thing.
He also didn't do that either.
He didn't answer the question.
Yeah. But I love that Steve echoes it to Nancy later. And
he gets the sentiment right.
Yeah.
He actually understood it. He just fumbles the exact quote of it.
Yeah. Which I was good with that too. Like I'm good with his again. I love the prototype of a character at this point in my mind that is a himbo. And that's him.
That is him.
And I feel like he does it so earnestly that I'm not feeling like it's a caricature of a himbo. I actually believe Steve's agency and where he comes from as maybe not knowing.
Mm-hmm. I didn't in season 3.
Yeah.
In season 3, I think they strayed a little bit.
Just a little bit, yeah.
But I think in this season, they kind of got it. They pulled back a little bit. Yeah, I mean, even down to the, like, again, the perception thing. Like, when they go into that room, you know, he asks Dustin the question, like, what are we looking for? And then he keeps looking, and he perceives those jars. And so this whole thing with Steve and Nancy and a little bit with Robin, the first time I watched the show, we got to this part. I saw that spider on his shoulder and I was like, it pissed me off. And I actually got up because we were watching in a group and I got up and I was like, I'm not going to watch this. And I left the room and our friend Ben was like, do you want me to pause it? And I'm like, no, I'm leaving so I don't have to. Because pulling in from that season 3 energy, especially because I must have seen him back out and run into Nancy because I was like, great, they're going to chastise him for being afraid of a spider.
Yeah.
So I don't even think I was there long enough to hear Black Widow.
Yeah.
Especially after the 2 interactions with Dustin that they just had. I'm like, I don't need to watch them do that to Steve. I'm not here for it. But in watching this through this time, I was really surprised. I was delighted by what's actually here. I realized, they don't make fun of him for the spider thing. Like Robin's joke is about his hair.
I also liked that maybe even as silly as that moment could have been, and as much as I maybe in my own fantasy wanted Joe Keery to become Spider-Man right there, I definitely was like, okay, cool. Like they're in the right house. Like that at least was enough for a small touch that I was like, okay, they're in Vecna's web. Cool. Thanks for that, show.
Yeah.
I like that.
But then the actual exchange between them, I love how earnest he sounds when he's like, we should all go out, like, you know, and Jonathan when he's back. Like, this also feels like a continuation of what Heidi was speaking to last episode about how, like, he's not trying to, like, shoot his shot.
But I also like that he, I think, is becoming self-aware of these profound feelings, relationships, and loves that he's developing. Because I guess maybe what's so complicated for him, and maybe his feelings for Nancy, is that he has feelings of love and attachment with her that were before all of this. And then for him to know that she's with another person, he is just being a good person. And honestly, I think that's like the big lesson I think to take there is just, he seems pretty aware and like he's listening. He's not dumb. He knows what's going on.
Yeah.
And I don't think he wants to do anything to upset it either. I think he's just trying to let things be as organic or natural as they can be. And maybe that's why I love Steve so much. He's a character that's just really in the moment a lot.
Mm-hmm. And also, like, in this moment, too, he's not, like, I mean, I think, again, based on where they go with it, I think it's clear that they're indicating that he's been carrying a torch for Nancy. But I like that, at least in this moment, he's not, like, pining either. And I appreciate, the like, finesse of that is really, really, and maybe it was unintentional, but I really like the way that was the way they threaded that needle was very, very well done.
Yeah.
Now, I noticed the score in this exchange, and I looked it up because I was like, what is this track? And curiously, this is the track, This Isn't You, which is from season 1, which initially I think plays for the first time when Barb and Nancy have their scene on the stairs, overlapped with Jonathan in the woods and Barb on the diving board with her hand bleeding.
Oh, wow.
So I thought maybe it was just picked for the sound. They've done that before, but it also seems like it might have been chosen for the significance of when we first heard it, which is only because if it was intentional, then I think it absolutely may indicate, no, don't, this is not good. Like, we're not going in this direction, which is why I said the thing with the board and the parallel there is so interesting, because that feels like they're going, no, we are taking down this barrier that's been put up. We are going to go in that direction. And then, it might have just...
They're playing with fire. Yeah, that's for sure.
It might have just been because it sounds good. Because it did. It sounded really nice. It sounded sweet and whatnot. And then to have it, but then to be like, oh, it's that piece of music.
But I like that it's enough of an echo to a time before, and with these characters already, it does feel at least reminiscent enough for me to think, wow, they've come a long way, these two, and to be where they are now, it's kind of it's just precious.
It is.
I guess against all the odds, it's hard for me to imagine all of the things that have happened and that's where they found themselves again.
The last time we saw them share like active screen time was when they split. I mean, quite literally, I'm including Dyer and Kiri in that. They're still the same people, but it's like they've evolved so much. Will that chemistry still be there? And it was like to see them together, and I'm like, yup.
Yeah.
Long story short, I love this, all of this stuff. It's so good. And it was such a relief to like watch this scene, having not really watched it before. Like even in my rewatches, I've skipped it. And to kind of get here and be like, oh, okay, it's a different energy.
Yeah.
As far as like the rest of the stuff happening in the Creel house, I mean, Max and Lucas, 10 out of 10, no notes. I love it. I love Lucas being a dork. I love their chemistry. I love how honest and not forceful Lucas is with her. Lumax forever.
Yeah, I also ship it because the innocence of it is so believable. I just love how genuine they are. I can really feel the two of them reaching for one another.
Again, like, I mean, seriously, the way that he's not forceful with her, he's still being very gentle, but he's also like he's like nudging that boundary and saying, I've really missed your laugh. Like that's speaking to not just, hey, I miss you, but also like, I've missed seeing you not be burdened by grief. Mm-hmm. In terms of the house hauntedness aspect of the Creel house, I mean, it is really amazing. It continues to be amazing. Like, this is definitely one aspect of the show that does really, really well on rewatch, because even though you know what they're picking up on, it's still it's still super compelling. And yet the first time through, I think I was starting to get very confused, like maddeningly wondering, what is the connection between Vecna and the Creel house, but still thinking that it had to be something separate from the family itself. And I think the big reason is because Victor not being evil himself was a massive, like, throwing me off the scent.
I kind of felt like because of a lot of popular 80s horror and really feeling this season's spotlight, a lot of it, I felt like the haunted house had leanings that felt like Amityville horror, that felt like the house in It, because that also is a really good moment where kids specifically go to a haunted location. And so I felt like they really dug deep on a lot of stuff on this season. And even the lake gives me Friday the 13th vibes. Actually, in fact, I just went on a bachelor trip camping where they filmed Friday the 13th. And I got to see the actual lake that they did all that filming on. And that was really cool. And honestly, seeing it just gave me that summer camp vibe, the same way that seeing the lake, the boat, this season just had so much influence. And then obviously Victor Creel was Robert Englund. So like that was awesome. But also that I knew going into the season, I was like, oh, Robert Englund is in this. And I knew that they used that as a part of the marketing. So I also felt like that was a red herring. Obviously, this well-known horror actor is going to play a somewhat horrifying role. And I just assumed in my like naive heart, he must be bad. He must be a bad guy.
It's a natural assumption, yeah.
And like, I guess he was, but ultimately that was the red herring.
Cool, because no, he's not.
Yeah, he was not at all. He's the one who's just trapped behind by it all, and Henry made it away. Actually,
hearing you say that, like we talked a lot about that last episode, but that's a really fascinating way to look at it. Like, yeah, of course you would, because you actually like horror, right?
I like a lot of it. Yeah. And like, I feel like to think about horror from the days that are stuff like Friday the 13th and Evil Dead, where you could look at that and be like, man, this is some awesome B-movie stuff, but I can see what they're doing. And it's awesome to know that those movies have become like the staples now, where sure, production value has jumped through the roof. Writing and the psychological twists and the complicated relationships are so much more than they've ever been. And yeah, love to see it. But this season had so much influence from so much other horror that I was like, man, this is awesome. It really felt like the biggest amalgamation of horror.
Okay.
That's actually one of the biggest high points I'll give this whole season.
Okay. That's fascinating.
But yeah, Victor Creel was a really good You Misled Me.
That actually, hearing you say all of that makes me appreciate that sequence all the more. Like, we already raved about it, but that's a fascinating point.
He's that much more of a cursed character.
Like, Heidi spoke last episode about how to have Vecna embody what he does was ballsy. And then to use music in the way they do was ballsy. I actually think for them to do what they did with Victor was also very ballsy.
Big time.
For all of what you just said.
I wonder what some bigger fans of horror would say about that, actually. What did you think? Was that a cool choice for you? Did you love that? Or did you feel like you didn't get your money's worth when you found out, like, oh, this prominent horror actor was going to be in this show, and also kind of play a role that's very related to what his very popular horror character did.
Yeah.
Invading dreams, dream space, and turning that against you and killing you in that space, you know? To go that close to the sun and then also be like, hey, by the way, joke's on you.
Yeah. Well, and to have it completely work in the context of the show. Well, so then that leads me to wonder, like in the Creel house, when they find when the stuff starts happening with the lights, from the horror perspective, when they end up in the attic, it did strike me as like when they're standing in the circle and the lights are all coming on. Obviously, there's the context of we know what's happening, but that felt very like seance-y to me.
Oh, very.
Is that a reference to something specific?
Not necessarily, but I do feel like seances are very popular, like things to have happen in a horror movie to see, you know, what is haunting this house or, you know, anything like that. And that's been used in stuff from, I think, as far as X-Files to Are You Afraid of the Dark?
Right.
So that becomes very palatable in my mind. But I would say that, like, because haunted houses are such a location thing, I got a lot of Hellraiser vibes from this season as well. And Vecna strictly gave me a lot of Pinhead vibes too. Okay. In that from another world can come into this world, can take you back to theirs, and just so many unanswered questions too.
Except that Vecna's not actually from another world.
No, yeah.
He's a human dude.
Yeah, he's a human dude.
The way that scene in the attic is woven in with the stuff with Patrick's death. Like, I really love how those two narratives are threaded together all through the episode. Yeah. I mean, and starting with Chrissy's funeral. I mean, I assume it's a funeral. It looks like a funeral.
I think so, or a memorial of some kind.
Yeah, because her mother's speech is not a eulogy.
No.
It's, ugh.
Yeah.
There's so much about everything around Chrissy, except Eddie, that is really, really icky. Chrissy and her mother had some very unhealthy dynamics in place. So in a way, it's not surprising that her mother is using this as like kind of a
look at me kind of thing.
Kind of, but also
that's like, kind of the vibe I got, which I didn't love that, especially, I guess maybe I just wanted the grief to be more real. But that's also where I'm like, yeah, a memorial. This was totally not a funeral.
It's a really fascinating way to think about how much of an influence that might have been on Jason and his teammates.
Oh, sure.
And it's like, and them showing up at Reefer Rick's still in their suits.
Oh, yeah.
I actually really liked that because they didn't go home to change. It's like, no, we went straight there.
Yeah, well, and I think Jason said something like no stone unturned at some point when they consider Reefer Rick's. Mm-hmm. And that's the point where I'm like, okay, the tenacity of these dude bras has really picked up. They themselves are also messing with a power that they don't fully understand or reckon.
I like seeing Patrick kind of start to go, I don't know if, even if I believe this, I don't know that I want to keep
doing this,
poking this particular dragon. Like, this seems like maybe not smart.
That's maybe where some of the buy-in in particular is something that I'm like, I don't know if I totally buy it that the team is just blindly behind Jason on this one. But I can see how in numbers they probably are confident, and that is scary because we've seen it. There's a part of me that leans out a little bit there too, because I just have to imagine there are some kids that even under peer pressure, they're like, yeah, dude, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, ultimately that's what happens with Lucas.
Yeah. But it is a really good vehicle to use from an actual time in life that this happened, and definitely demonstrate how bad that radicalization can be.
I feel really bad when Patrick dies.
Yeah. Every one of their deaths is visually like kind of hard to forget. Is just, it hurts.
Again, since you're here, I'm going to ask you, is it the way that Vecna kills them with the bones breaking in the eyes, is that specifically calling to anything in the genre?
Yes and no. I would say that it's the control. It's that being able to puppet master. I'm confident that there's some type of like mind spike or sliver where Vecna uses an ability, and if you fail said, I think, wisdom saving throw, or it might be constitution, I feel like there's a control aspect that he can move you and do whatever he wants with you. So the damage, the crumpling, the bones, the crunching, all that breaking, it's more of a he has forced you to do that to your own body. Okay. And that's how I felt it described in the monster manual. That's how I feel like I, Dungeon Master, would have come to understand it. But Vecna strikes me as one of those creatures who probably does get to make legendary actions as well, takes actions in player turns, is just that powerful.
That makes sense. Because I even wondered about that at one point. I'm like, how is he able to do that when so much of what his power is psychological? Mm-hmm. That's creepy.
Yeah, very, very, yeah.
Yeah, comes with the territory.
Think of it as just like the mastermind villain, the hive mind mastermind.
I want to say that when I first watched this episode, Eddie is probably, I mean, even though he falls in the water and I'm like worried about how much weight he has on him with those clothes and the chains and all. And I'm like, but when he went, I mean, he pops right back up, but it was like thinking, and in a way I was on this rewatch, I was like, oh, I kind of hope he doesn't see this. Cause it's like, he's already seen it once. He doesn't want to see it again.
Yeah.
Like, oh, Eddie, I'm sorry.
I know.
For so many reasons.
I know. My man's is just getting so traumatized throughout this season. And, you know, I feel like that's a through line throughout this season is just characters that either hadn't seen someone die in front of them before or just had not, I don't know, just ever had that happen, you know? Mm-hmm. That was very real.
Well, kind of speaking of trauma, let's finish out this episode with talking about 11.
Oof. Big oof.
I mean, pretty much right away, Brenner's line, if we told you, it'd ruin the surprise.
Yeah. Cringy. I mean, and he's great. He's really great at playing that role. Yeah. Because, like, that is also his energy.
That is directly to us, the audience.
Yeah.
And that just makes me go bullshit.
Yeah.
Because it is. It feels like such a cop-out. Like, I understand that they don't want to do that, but the fact that it's wrapped up in this surprise to her, I especially considering that they've gone out of their way to explain other things in this season in particular, and that this is the only explanation we get as far as I remember. Yeah. I mean, Heidi has been on record this season as saying, like, we didn't need Brenner, not as an active, alive person, because he absolutely could have been in the simulation, and that would have freaked her out enough.
Yeah, I would agree with that, because I think the simulation was jarring no matter what, both for Eleven and even us as viewers, getting used to what was really going on, how, why, when was this exactly. There was a lot to establish, and while I had questions that were definitely like, well, where has he been? I don't know. I could have done without him.
This whole arc, I just feel like is unnecessarily padded. It's like the fact that so much of a lot of these episodes with her feel very circular and very redundant. Like we cover the same territory over and over again.
I definitely feel like we've been already 2 times before this at a stage of 11, you have to be stronger. It gives me big anime vibes, honestly. The constant same enemy or force and having to be stronger than it. I don't know, maybe I'm really going out on a limb here, but like 11 is like the Goku of Dragon Ball Z and is just constantly having to ascend a new power level. You know, that's fine. But when it's the mechanism so many times, I don't know what roof I'm supposed to believe is the height of her power or the height of our villain's powers, you know?
One of my script doctoring approaches that I would have had is in that introduction scene with Brenner, that to me, Elle should have been like flipped to Owens and been like, what the fuck?
Yeah, for real.
And that a lot of Brenner's dialogue actually could have been given to Owens. Like
for sure.
And he should have. I feel like part of the problem for me is that there is never any on camera, in context acknowledgement of the fact that he screwed her over.
Oh yeah.
He never says, if I had told you, you wouldn't have come. Like there should have been some vocalization of that. And for me, the waking, you know, and when we talked about a little bit of this at the end of chapter 3, you know, I said that it's hard for me, as much as I like that sequence at the end of chapter 3, this is the reason that I don't think I can ever fully forgive the character, because her waking up in what she thinks is the lab, it's one of those, I don't think, you know, to borrow from stuff that Heidi has said multiple times, I don't think they thought about the implications of what that actually means for her, because they have not only shaved her head, but they've put her into that suit, which we see.
There's a lot of complicated off-screen things to unwrap about it.
Yep.
And after already having had that guard say what he did, when 11 tried to run, be a good girl for the doctor or something like that. And
I was nice for the doctor.
Yeah, I think that's what it was. And it just immediately made me gag with like, gross, I hate it. And for a character that just got kind of swindled into coming to this place.
Yeah.
This is gross.
Like, why? He did not need to speak. I'm like, was that guy like we have somebody who needs to speak on set, so they gave him a line?
Or did they accidentally find out that guy was union or something and they had to give him a line or something? Like, I don't know.
And then why that line?
Yeah, I hated it. If I were that actor, you know, speaking on just did you have a single line in a thing, I would hate that.
Yeah.
I would hate that was the thing that I either was given or that's what I walked away with.
Yeah.
And then Brenner basically put her to sleep and then cradle her into this like fetal position. I mean, so much cringe creep factor. Maybe it was supposed to make me feel that way. Maybe that's the best I'll give it. But yeah, that non-consent informed place with children is a very scary, dangerous place to be. And even for entertainment's purposes, you know, as a TV show, you know, that can definitely incite terror, uneasy feelings in me, but that's also just a dangerous place to be. So yeah, scary. I really didn't like that. This whole entire episode just gave me big Brenner creep cringe factor vibes. And by the time we see what happens to him and meet his demise, it's not redemption to me. In fact, I just really wish he hadn't been there.
The more I think about it, the more, I think Heidi kind of called it in our reactions episodes. It's like, at the time I was like,
kill it with fire.
Well, no, no, I know, but
him.
kind of, and kind of almost literally.
Yeah.
You're probably right. That was probably their intention, to make it this creepy and this sick. But I don't know that it needed to be. I think
it's too much.
It is. It's too much. They swung a little too hard.
Definitely sits with me, and it sits with me through the episode because I dress up as Spider-Man and I visit kids and I talk to them. And so I'm very passionate about hearing kids' voices and, understanding their agency and having a fine and profound respect for that as I'm coming to just learn more about kids' experiences as Spider-Man. It's great. And I felt like 11 had already kind of broken free from this in a pretty liberating way. Mm-hmm. And I guess I just really did not need or want to see all of this happen to her again. There were other horror aspects of the show that they could have leaned into more than that.
Well, and I think you could have still done the surrealism aspect of it, even with her knowing what she was getting into. Because not only is there this creep factor in this, absolutely disgusting physical consequence of what they chose to do, but also this, like I'm gonna say, like, I feel like Elle took psychic damage from the experience of waking up in the lab. And yet I have to be honest in that, not actually unlike the cold open of the season, part of the reason it hit so hard is because of how effectively it's shot, how effective her performance is.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Millie Bobby Brown killed it.
The tears just fall, the extreme close up on her face, the way she feels her head, like, that is so dark.
Yeah. It's intense.
And it's I do feel like it's unnecessary, both in universe and from like the creative perspective. Yeah. Like, I think that would have been traumatic enough for her, even if she knew it was coming. Yeah.
I just feel like there's other ways they could have gone around it. And I already had all kinds of cringy feelings about the Papa-daughter feelings and vibes, and then with the way the episode ends with them walking off together hand in hand, and like, don't love that imagery coming back, or that we're finding maybe even 11 in a state of like rescinding. I would have thought that more of her power would have come from a place of release, her own agency, all those things. I don't know. I guess maybe I just would have found that more uplifting as well. And and actually, speaking of like uplifting, this was an uplifting thought to me on this episode until it wasn't. And it had everything to do with Brenner and Owens. But I think during the walkabout in the facility, they said something like, all of the people that are here right now are here because they believe in you. Mm-hmm. And to me, that was probably the most nice, hopeful thing to hear. And I guess maybe in my heart of hearts, I wanted to believe that was real.
Just like Elle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really feel like had they maybe just gone that route, there were so many things they could have just dodged or saved themselves time or given other screen time to other actors that I also would have really liked to have seen some more. Jonathan.
I was heartbroken that they went this way with Owens, because I really liked Owens so much. And I was so excited he was going to be an active role in this season. And then this is what they, like, you did again, like, how much more interesting would it have been if it had been just him?
Yeah.
There are moments in here that I really did actually like. Her waking up after she's gone into cardiac arrest, like, and the way she attacks Brenner, like, hell yeah.
Yeah.
The callback to season 1 in that final shot when, it's right after we've seen Elle make her first kill and Brenner comes in, and like that, the mirroring of that is great, especially because she doesn't cower here like she did in the first one, because she's not too tired. And at the same time, this is also a parallel to Hopper's escape attempt in chapter 4.
Yeah, that's true.
And, if it's kind of slightly skewed, she has the choice to leave, except not really.
I was going to say, does she really though?
I think they were making the deliberate choice to have her regress. I just don't like that choice. If, I still think you could have had this moment where she ends up staying, but like, I think it would have been so much more empowering. Like, if the only thing you did is that after she has that massive release of power and Brenner comes up and her reaction is, okay, I'll come with you, but I'm not taking your hand. And like in this moment, if he had said daughter, like if he had initiated and said daughter and she said Dr. Brenner. I would have actually really, really loved everything up to this point. Because I think he's also trying to he was trying to get her to this release point, and that's why he was putting her through all of this. But even if it's well done, even if it's earned, I just don't like it.
Yeah, same. I wanted to see her rise more above it, see her do it her way.
Yes. It actually reminds me a lot of what I've said earlier in the season about how I feel about Will. It's just, I want so much better for her, even under these circumstances. And I feel like that was possible. So it just winds up being a real bummer of a place to end the episode. And yeah, so that's going to bring us into final thoughts.
I feel like where it starts is strong, where it goes from there among all of these different crews. Like, actually, I think this episode is great considering where it's at. But I think my biggest critique is, again, just there's that tonal dissonance. And I just feel like we got to come back to that because there's a lot of that in this episode in particular. There are moments in this where I am finding the direction. I'm seeing where the rising action is going to go towards a conclusion. And that's big.
It's funny because I actually really like a lot of this episode, which makes the ending an especially rough landing. Yeah. I actually broke my usual custom of not continuing the series and started chapter 6 because I hated to leave it there. It leaves me with such a sour taste in my mouth, and just a really not great feeling about the show that I didn't want to walk away with.
I wonder how I would have felt week to week with this show, hitting about this episode and then going into the next, or just how palatable everything would have been.
Well, and we've tracked it through the podcast of how Stranger Things usually has this we end in one place and we pick up immediately after. And that's something I didn't touch on at the beginning, is that because we have this time jump, it radically does not do that.
Yeah.
And, where the next episode starts, we'll touch on that then. But I think this season does a little bit more of the jumping around in general because we are so scattered geographically, if nothing else. And yeah, this was definitely one where I was actually really glad that we had the next episode readily available because yikes.
Yes. Big yikes.
The other big disappointment that I want to touch on here in final thoughts is that I initially came into this episode really excited when even just having looked at the list of episodes and who they were written by before it dropped, and seeing that Kate Trefree, who also produced this episode and I think a number of episodes this season, seeing that she was the writer on this was a big point of interest for me because she was the lead writer on the Sauna Test in season 3, which was such a breath of fresh air that season. That is still to me the ultimately best episode of season 3 by a long shot.
Yeah.
And she worked in so much great moments of female perspective without making the male characters wrong. It gave the characters so much agency and brought this groundedness to a season that had been so wildly bombastic up to that point. This almost felt like the opposite, specifically in Elle's storyline. I mean, I love the way that Trefree handles the characterization of Nancy, Max, and Robin, and even Joyce. Not as much, but a little bit. But Elle, to do that to her character and not comment on it once, to have it never stated anywhere. And somehow it feels framed as one of the don't worry our pretty heads about it, but in the worst way. Oh, well, that's Brenner. What did you expect? And that built-in sensibility that we're just supposed to go along with it is really what gets under my skin. And that's just what was so unexpected from this writer. Now, I will absolutely acknowledge that a lot of Elle's storyline in this episode specifically might have been out of Trefree's hands. This may have been an overarching story and decisions or direction given to her from on high that she just had to work with. And given how messy Elle's plotline is overall this season, at least in my opinion, I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. I mean, I love all the interactions with her and one. We didn't touch on that much, but that was really good. I mean, one question I continue to have is, what is 2's relationship to 1? Does 2 know that the orderly is 1? And if so, what was that relationship like?
So many questions.
Yeah. And so, you know, apart from the Elle stuff and with the tonal dissonance of some of the Russia stuff, like, I mean, I do, in spite of that, I actually really dig the episode. Like, I love the mounting tension, the puzzle solving. I love the romantic stuff, like those little sparks that we get. I actually really enjoy getting Hopper's backstory, getting to see Eddie again. Like, all that stuff works. I still love Joyce and Murray, which we touched on. You know, I enjoy him getting to have his moment, absurd as it might be. And it was a relief in some ways because I came into this episode like really nervous because I not in like the, oh, I'm nervous to talk about stuff, but just like I remembered the Elle stuff taking up so much of the air in the room and feeling like I don't want to talk about that because it really bums me out. But then remembering like, but this is the episode with the Creel house. Like, this is when they go to the Creel house. And knowing that this episode also had to follow Dear Billy, like that was a tough act to follow, and I feel like given that it actually did a lot better than I was expecting, so that was a big relief. And like, you know, I didn't say it enough through our conversation, but like the visuals are on point again this episode, you know, delivered to us again from Caleb Heyman, who's back as DP for the first time since chapter 2, Vecna's Curse, and he will be the DP for the remainder of season 4.
Whoa,
and,
sweet.
Yeah. And
that's awesome.
There were 3 editors credited to this episode, which is actually unusual. Like, there's usually multiple editors listed like on the team, but this was the first time that I in a while or ever that I've seen 3 listed as just the episode like main editors. So
that's a lot of credit then.
And like, I mean, and they're all 3 of them are Stranger Things veteran editors, Casey Chichaki, Nat Fuller, and Dean Zimmerman. So with that in mind, I'm looking forward to seeing how the visuals progress into the rest of the season, especially in the next episode where we get a lot more emphasis on the lake as a set piece.
Yes, which that is exciting.
Then with that said, that is going to conclude our contemplation on Chapter 5, The Nina Project. As always, thank you for listening. You can join the conversation by finding us on TikTok and Instagram, or even sending us an email. All the links are in the show notes. And if you're a fan of our pod, please consider giving us a rating and review. Coffee and Contemplation is available wherever you get your podcasts.
Thanks, y'all. Catch Robin and Steve on the next episode.
Over and out.
I adopted 2 cats. I don't know if I told you that.
Yes, you did.
Okay, good.
And you've officially gone with Oscar and Pedro?
Yeah, I've decided that that's it for sure.
And that is, I am assuming, inspired by the 2 actors.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Their full names are actually Meowsker Isaac and Pedro Pascal.
That's amazing.